Okay, it is a little after 10, about 10:06, so we're going to go ahead and start our meeting. Um, Thank you, everyone that's here in person and online. Um, let's see. Like I said, welcome. This is our FY 2026 Brazos River Basin Clean Rivers Steering Program Committee meeting. We again are having this hybrid meeting, so definitely bear with us switching between slides and programs and maps and all that kind of thing. We do have technical difficulties a lot of times, but it really helps our attendance being able to present things for people outside of the meeting. And I want to let you know that we will be recording the meeting so that we can post it on our website. As you'll see, my microphone here is green, so that means y'all can hear me and it's being recorded. So anyone that has a question or whenever you need to speak up, go ahead and just press the button on any microphone in front of you so that we can all hear you and the people remotely can hear you as well. Let's see. For those people here in person, you probably already noticed, if you want to get, coffee or water, it's in the back of the room. Or if anyone needs to use the restrooms, out either one of these doors right behind me, that's where the bathrooms are. So let me start off again by introducing myself. My name is Jenna Olson, and I'm the Clean Rivers Program Manager here at the Brazos River Authority. We have several really informative talks, hopefully this morning. And throughout the meeting, I'm going to be going over the draft 2026 integrated report that's newly come out and the monitoring plan for FY27. And we'll also hear about some water quality projects going on in the basin, as well as information on a water reallocation study, a new reservoir construction project. And we'll also hear about some educational outreach going on that's affecting multiple watersheds, a little bit about aquatic life monitoring and some results, and hopefully some updates on our threatened and endangered species projects. So we do have new faces here, a lot of old, but a lot of new too. So I'd kind of like to go around the room and everyone just state your name. And like I said, be sure and turn the microphone on when it's your turn. Just your name and who you're with. If you're not with any, organization, just what your interest is here in the Brazos River Basin and Clean Rivers program. Like I said, I'm Jenna Olson. We'll start over here in this corner.
So I'm Christina Ramirez, and I'm with the City of Harker Heights.
And I'm Valencia Ramirez, and I'm with the City of Nolanville.
Good morning, I'm Melissa Marsh with the BRA.
I'm Rachel Byrne with the BRA.
Ryan Burge with the BRA.
Logan Johnson with the BRA.
Calvin Smith, BRA.
Matt Stillbauer, Texas Water Resource Institute.
Kathy Sands, Save Salado Creek, Salado, Texas.
Carolyn Britt, Save Salado Creek.
Jody Haskins, Save Salado Creek.
I'm Whitney Ingram with Clearwater Underground Water Conservation District in Belton.
I'm Nicole Hughes. I'm with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality in Central Office, Austin.
Jenna Wadman, TCEQ.
I'm Lisa Persine. I'm with Texas A&M AgriLife Research out of Temple.
Kimberly Gomez with the City of Waco.
Kathy Lathan with the Brazos River Authority.
Tiffany Malzahn, Brazos River Authority.
Stacy Vance, Brazos River Authority.
Nicole Bowmans, Brazos River Authority.
Corey Skanes with the Brazos River Authority. I think I'm the last one.
Wilson Snyder, TCEQ Waco.
I'm Melissa Mullins with Baylor University.
Okay, and that's everyone that we have here in person right now. And there are quite a few people online. If anyone would like to just speak up and say your name and who you're with, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, we do have a list of attendees. Anyone online want to introduce yourself? Again,
BRA. I'm Annalie Epps. I'm with the Mill Creek Watershed Partnership and also Texas A&M AgriLife Extension.
I'm Chris Johnson with Living Waters Fly Fishing in Round Rock, Texas.
I'm Mark Wenzel with River Science at the Texas Water Development Board.
Ryan Bale with Vista Corp.
I'm Bruce Bodson with Lower Brazos River Watch and A&M Galveston.
Good morning, everybody. Kyle Runt. I'm with the USDA NRCS.
Robin Pugh, TCEQ and DFW region.
Christopher Furmans, Brazos Resort Authority.
Okay, I think that's just about everybody. Thank y'all very much for introducing yourselves over there. So beginning, in the CRP arena of things, as a short introduction to CRP, because like I said, some of you have not attended these meetings before. CRP stands for the Texas Clean Rivers Program. It was established in 1991, and it is a state fee-funded, non-regulatory program that was created to provide a framework and a forum for managing water quality issues in the state. And one of the things that BRA does in accordance with this program is to encourage stakeholder participation with the goal to help improve surface water quality in the basin. So this steering committee that we hold once a year is one way that we fulfill our obligation to inform, engage, and promote stakeholder participation. So again, thanks for coming. So under the Clean Rivers Program, BRA and other entities provide water quality data to the TCEQ that they use for assessment purposes. And the TCEQ produces the Texas Integrated Report, or IR, every 2 years, an even numbered years. So this is one of those years, 2026, as required by the Federal Clean Water Act, Section 305B and 303D. And this IR describes the status of Texas's natural surface waters and the extent to which they attain the Texas surface water quality standards. So the 303D list, it comes from this report, and it designates whether a stream or reservoir segment does or does not meet these water quality standards. And when segments are on the 303D list, they're referred to as impaired. So I'll be saying that a lot throughout this meeting. The IR and the 303D list have to be approved by the EPA before it's final and can be used for regulatory or decision-making purposes. So this, the 2026 IR is a draft form right now. So it's the draft 2026 IR, and it's been completed and approved by TCEQ, and they're just awaiting approval by the EPA, correct? So, okay. So throughout this meeting, I'm going to be giving a summary and some highlights of that draft integrated report, and I'll also go over our proposed monitoring for FY27. Move on to the next slide here. Okay, so and I think everyone here knows water bodies refer to a stream or reservoir in our basin, and each of them is assigned a segment identification number that's defined in Appendix A of the Surface Water Quality Standards. And each of these segments have designated uses and water quality standards and criteria associated with them to support those designated uses. And I'll also use the term AU a lot. It stands for assessment unit. And then those are just portions of a segment. It may be an entire segment, or a segment may be broken into several AUs. So for a summary of the draft 2026 integrated report, a total of 251 segments were evaluated, and that's composed of 422 assessment units. That is a lot of assessment units as our TCEQ people. Is it the most assessment units in a basin? Okay. Definitely the most segments, but I mean, all those AUs too. For instance, Possum Kingdom is broken up into 12 assessment units. But yes. We've got 8 segment impairments were added in the draft 2026 report, and 4 segment impairments were delisted as compared to the 2024 integrated report. So 79 segments are listed as impaired in the 2026 draft, and that's about 31% of all of the segments assessed have some type of impairment. And our impairment that causes us the most issue that we have the most of is bacteria. So 69 segments are listed as impaired due to elevated bacteria, and that is a total of 87% of all the impairments. So it's definitely comprises the most impairments, and probably the same in all the river basins. We've got 9 segments listed as impaired due to depressed dissolved oxygen. That's our next most prevalent, but there was no net change from the 2024 report to the draft 26. We got 5 segments listed as impaired due to either chloride, sulfate, and or total dissolved solids. Also no change from the last report. 1 segment listed as impaired due to high pH. That is no change as well. 2 segments listed as impaired due to excessive algal growth, and that is not new either. Also, some of the more rare impairments, 1 impairment due to impaired fish community, 2 segments impaired due to toxicity and sediment, 1 listed as impaired due to mercury in edible tissue, and none of those are new. And as far as concerns, these are not impairments, but they are parameters that are getting close to the level that would make them impaired, or they're getting close to a screening level. That is concerning. So out of those 251 segments, 104 segments are identified as having concerns on the draft report. So that's about 41% of our assessed segments having some type of concern. And what makes up most of the concerns is chlorophyll and or elevated nutrients. So 73 segments have those concerns, and that's about 70% of all the concerns. So that is the most prevalent concern-wise. Okay, so monitoring for FY27. Our general strategy right now, we monitor approximately 110 stations for CRP as routine monitoring stations. We probably this year will keep about that same amount. There may be some negotiating. I also have up here that there's other entities that monitor, TCEQ, TIR, TWRI, and they monitor a combined number of about 177 stations. And next week, at about the same time, we have what's called a coordinated monitoring meeting, where we and those other entities get together and discuss where we plan on monitoring, where someone, TCQ may request we monitor somewhere, we may want to drop some stations, and we negotiate all that out so that we're not duplicating efforts or leaving anything out. But as far as BRA's, strategy, about 110 stations. We also have 5 stations where we do in-stream flow-based long-term biological and riparian monitoring. And that's in support of our water management plan and TCQ's environmental flow standards. So there's 5 stations for FY27 that we want to concentrate on, which will limit us doing our Clean Rivers program biological monitoring. But several years ago, we approached TCEQ. It's been a long time. We do these in-stream flow-based biological monitoring events, and it's a little more intensive than Clean Rivers program biological monitoring, but we think we can capture all the CRP parameters in this monitoring. So we kind of want to do double duty and try to also use those 5 stations as Clean River program aquatic life monitoring stations. But that's another thing we'll try to discuss with TCQ in our meeting next week. And we also, ongoing, we perform native and endangered mussel monitoring that we negotiated with Fish and Wildlife Services a while back for our candidate conservation agreement with insurances, or CCAA. Okay, so this is the part of the meeting on your agenda. I start going over each watershed and where we're monitoring and what is impaired. So we're going to start with the Salt and Double Mountain Forks. But if anybody has a phone or iPad or anything, and they want to get to a cool map, it'll even work on your phone. You can use that IR code or QR, whatever they're called these days. Or you can type in that long link on the top. But what it will pull up for you, and I'm debating on putting this on our BRA website at some point, but let me get to it. No, I'll just put a link to it. Hold on, got to figure out how to share it from here. I can't just click on the link. Here we go. Boom. Yeah. Oh, Windows, there we go. Boom. Okay, here is an a map. And it's a little bit different than the one that's on our website, but it does have a lot of the information. And what I try to do is consolidate all the information from the integrated reports and our monitoring into one thing. Try to get my screen to where I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so all of the red dots are where BRA monitors. All the blue dots are TCEQ, yellow is TIER, and maroon colored is TWRI. And our in-stream flow stations will look like a star. And I try to color code all of the impairments. It's kind of difficult because some stations have combined impairments and maybe may have bacteria and dissolved oxygen. But anyway, try to color code it to make it easily seen what's going on there. So like I said, we will close that legend. Okay. This is our whole basin, as you saw. And we're going to start with the Salt and Double Mountain Fork. Okay, primarily TCEQ monitors here. BRA has one station over here. As a summary, there's 14 routine stations. There's 5 bacteria impairments in this watershed, 1 chloride TDS impairment, a change in the draft 26 report, 1 chloride impairment was delisted, and that was on the salt fork here. And that's one of those that kind of comes on and goes off depending if we're in drought or rainy or because there's natural salt production up there. So that's the status of that. There's also 1 reservoir with mercury in edible tissue. And concerns, there's 3 with chlorophyll and nutrient concerns, 2 bacterial concerns, and 1 dissolved oxygen concern. And one thing I wanted to show y'all, like I said, if you pulled it up on your phone or whatever, you can click on a stream and it will tell you about it. It'll give you that segment ID that I mentioned that all of the streams have. There's that segment ID up there. It describes the segment. It gives you the assessment unit and if it's impaired or not, and if it has a concern or not. You could also click on the dot. And the dots, like I said, are monitoring stations. It gives you, what that monitoring station is called, who's monitoring it, how many times a year they go out to monitor it. And also, if you want data, not all stations have data in the BRA's database that we keep. If we collect the data, it's in our database. If you want to see the data, but we don't have it, like this station, we do not monitor, you can click on, there's a CRP data tool and a TCEQ map data tool. But you can click on that, and of course you have to fill out the information you want, your date range, and you'd have to pick the basin and the segment ID, which that's helpful that that's on that map for you, and you can get data that way. But if there is a red station where BRA has data, we try to make it a little user friendly. So it's the same information. You can go down to BRA data, click on view, and it brings you to our data search. And it gives you that station. You can pick a date range. You can pick parameters that you want to see. Like for an example, a bacteria. Hopefully that date range will work that's defaulted in there. You can get data, and these are our last few data points, the bacterial readings. So if you want to, you can also, if you need to work with data, you can click on this button and export that to Excel. Which is handy because a lot of time, if you get data from TCQ's website, they give it to you in a text format, and then you've got to put it in Excel and do what you want to do with it. But anyway, that's just a little thing I wanted to share with y'all, that this is available if people are interested in that. All right, so that's a little summary of the Salt and Double Mountain Forks of the watershed. Anybody have any questions or water quality concerns or comments about that watershed? Then we will move on down the basin. The next is the Clear Fork of the Brazos River watershed. Okay, there were no changes in this watershed regarding the integrated report. TCQ monitors all those stations here. There's 16 monitoring stations. There are 2 bacterial impairments, one with an impaired fish community, and a reservoir here with the chloride sulfate TDS. I lumped those together for the purpose of the map, but that type of impairment. Also, 4 nutrient chlorophyll A concerns, a macrobenthic community concern, and a bacteria concern. I'm not going to flip back and forth here on this map, but if you want to look at layers, this is showing, like I said, all of the color-coded impairments, because that's the biggie. But if you want to look at, say, just the concerns, you can turn on and off some of these layers, if that's helpful to anyone. Oops. And this shows you the concerns, and there's the legend for that as well. So can't move my legend around. Can move the map around. There we go. So that's a feature too. But like I said, I won't bore y'all by flipping back and forth on my layers. We'll stick with impairments. Okay, well, that's the Clear Fork of the Brazos. Anybody have any concerns or questions about the Clear Fork? Either online or, oh, is anybody following on Teams in case anybody does ask any questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, we will move on to the upper watershed. The bad thing is you can't move these pop-ups around, but they're very useful. Okay, this is the upper Brazos River watershed, and it's got three of our reservoirs that are on the main stem. Quite a few monitoring stations, 37. In this, we've got 2 of those in-stream flow stations that we are wanting to concentrate on this year. One up by Palo Pinto and one near Glen Rose. Okay, and in this watershed, we've got 3 bacteria impairments, 3 segments. 1 segment impaired for chloride, sulfate, and or TDS, and then 2 for excessive algal growth. Those 2 that I mentioned are 2 small river reservoirs here, Lake Graham up here, and Lake Pat Cleburne down here. And then, of course, some concerns, 8 segments with chlorophyll A and or nutrient concerns, 1 with a bacterial concern, 2 DO concerns, 3 segments with habitat concerns, and 1 with macrobenthic community concern. And again, monitoring probably stay about the same, except for, like I said, concentrating on getting some of that in-stream flow data at those 2 stations. Does anybody here have any questions or concerns of anything going on in the upper Brazos River watershed? I don't. All righty. We will move on down to 1 more little watershed, Aquila Creek watershed. No impairments there, 5 routine stations, TCQ monitors on the reservoir up there. BRA has a routine monitoring station and 1 of those in-stream flow stations there that we may go back to this year. And 1 segment that has a dissolved oxygen, ammonia, and nitrate concern. That is it for the Aquila Creek watershed. Any questions or concerns there? Okay, well, this is the end of the first part of looking at all the watersheds. We'll move on to a talk then. We're going to hear from Rachel. We're switching, I'm sorry, everyone online, we're switching the agenda a little bit. We're flip-flopping those first 2 talks. So up now will be Rachel Lane talking about the Allens Creek Reservoir. And let me get to her presentation. Okay, there it is. And if you just click on your slide, it will advance to the next. So your notes are there. It should be set up. You're welcome. Perfect.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Lane, and I'm the program manager for the Allens Creek Reservoir Project. I appreciate the opportunity to give y'all an update today on where we are with this water supply project. Okay, I'll start with a quick orientation of the project. The reservoir site is about 9,500 acres that is solely owned by the BRA as of 2022. We hold a TCEQ water right permit that authorizes us to impound around 145 acre feet, divert 2,200 cubic feet per second, and ultimately produce about 100,000 acre feet of firm yield each year. We have 2 potential intake locations along the Brazos River, and the decision will be on which one to use will be driven by geomorphology, sediment loading, protected species, and constructability. So that gives you a baseline understanding of the project's physical location and the constraints that we're working within to move into permitting and design. And this slide highlights the major components of the reservoir system. You can see the footprint there and then the pump station locations that I mentioned. Our components are likely an earthen embankment. We anticipate having a spillway and outlet. The intake will be on the river, but we'll have pumps to supply the reservoir from off the river with a pipeline. And then we did enter into a permitting and design contract with Gannett Fleming Transsystems, and they're now GFT. And in the last year, we completed 531 worker days on site. So following the board's authorization in March of 2025, we kicked off several major technical efforts, a survey, utility corridor work, geomorphic survey, initial cultural and environmental assessments, and then a preliminary geotechnical investigation. We used a mix of drilling rigs and some collected deep core samples. Other Others conducted penetration tests to measure soil strength. And all of this was to inform the suitability of foundations for the embankment and the pump station, and to help us anticipate permitting needs in the future. So the core project features, like I mentioned, are the embankment, spillway, intake, and pump station location. And each of those elements plays a role in shaping the alternatives that we'll be analyzing in the next phase of our progress, the project, which is alternatives analysis. And the permitting and technical considerations ultimately will determine the project layout, footprint, and even the total timeline. A project of this scope will involve several, many regulatory agencies, I should say. And we anticipate working with the Army Corps of Engineers closely on this project, but there will be several others involved. And our strategy is to maintain consistent communication across the agencies so that we can reduce surprises and keep the permitting process moving throughout as we are better informed. So over the next few slides, I'll walk through each discipline of our work and highlight the progress to date. Early on, we had a major win, and that was avoiding a LiDAR flight over. So we were expecting to procure a new survey, but the Houston-Galveston Area Commission had already flown the area in 2024, and that data wasn't scheduled for public release until 2027, but through coordination with Austin County, we secured immediate access at no cost. Gannett Fleming validated the data, confirmed that it met the core dam standards, and this produced a savings of about $560,000. They processed 224 LiDAR tiles, which have been converted into CAD surfaces for design. So that data helped verify our property boundaries, especially the western boundary, which is tied to the 125-foot contour. And what that allowed us to do was to accelerate our Houston Toad survey. For environmental compliance, one of our early priorities was evaluating potential habitat for the Houston toad, which is federally listed. Because of the cost savings from the LiDAR effort, we were able to begin that survey during the January breeding season rather than waiting until next year. Wildlife biologists have installed audio recorders across the site to capture calling activity. At this stage, we're conducting presence-absence surveys, but they do require multiple years of data. Finally, receiving rain has helped that as well, because there were no toads or frogs. And now we're hearing some, but not the Houston toad yet. And then one of the most critical technical questions is river stability in this area and how that affects the pump station location. You can see on the slide, the Brazos River meander near the project site is more dynamic than we would prefer. Our geomorphic evaluation shows that the permitted location, PSA2, would likely require bank stabilization if we used it. We're still finalizing this report, but we will be taking that into consideration during our alternatives analysis. We've completed a preliminary cultural reconnaissance program, and we reviewed existing records, including some cultural resource surveys from the 1970s. The highest likelihood for cultural sites is around the outer edges of the project and then along the Allens Creek corridor, and then you can see in the purple near the Brazos River. Those are just potential areas of high probability. And so the highest likelihood being around the outskirts of the site, that's a good thing for us because our approach will be avoidance and minimizing impacts. The next step will be obtaining a Texas Antiquities permit so we can complete a full phase 1 survey. And that will be in the next year, that'll be the largest cultural inventory in the state of Texas. So we have completed a wetlands and streams preliminary assessment, and we used desktop and field reviews. They indicated several types of jurisdictional waters, the Brazos River, of course, Allen's Creek, which is likely jurisdictional, and multiple tributaries and ditches that will need additional detailed evaluation. And we've also identified forested wetlands, which will require mitigation if impacted. Our biological assessments looked at potential impacts to federally protected species within a 5-mile buffer to the site. We identified several protected species associated with the Brazos River. You can see those, they're shown along the river in the yellow line and then the blue dots. And then of course we have the Houston toad buffer area, protected area there, shown in purple in like that big purple spot, which is why we wanted to accelerate the Houston toad survey. The scale of biological fieldwork on this project in the next year is going to be significant. It'll be the largest aquatic resources survey in the state as well. These results will inform both permitting requirements and our alternatives analysis. The first phase of geotechnical investigation is complete. The baseline borings give us an initial understanding of soil stratigraphy, strength, and suitability for the embankment and for major structures. So looking ahead, we'll do a second phase planned in 2028. That will include a geophysics study and additional borings. The goal is to verify material availability for construction on site. The project is currently scoped with a conservative, realistic timeline that reflects today's regulatory environment. As of now, we anticipate a best case duration of around 10 years from start to finish. The sequence follows a BRA-led risk evaluation completed in early workshops, even beginning next month. Key uncertainties include the final embankment location, the pump station site, and any stabilization needs in the river, utility relocations, and mitigation requirements. We expect to refine the schedule significantly over the next 18 months as permitting becomes more defined and we have clearer regulatory direction. So looking ahead, the combined permitting, design, and construction effort, like I said, will span a decade or more. Our priority in the near term is continuing field investigations, completing the alternatives analysis, coordinating with regulatory agencies, and preparing the documentation necessary for a strong permit application. We'll continue sharing updates on the website. If you would like to be notified about those, then you can send your contact information to information@brazos.org. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, do you have any idea what the loss due to evaporation might be annually? Because large shallow reservoirs have more evaporation obviously than deep.
Currently, we don't even have a footprint yet. So I don't know. Definitely, we do have some considerations there with the biological and cultural resources that we know are there. We haven't completed those investigations yet. So really, it's probably another 12 months before we have enough design to even know what that surface area will be. And sure, there is evaporation will be significant, I understand, for because it will likely be pretty shallow. But we don't know yet. We don't know the rates. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, next speaker will be Peyton Lisenby now with the Lake Whitney reallocation feasibility study update. Let me, yeah, there. Okay, there it is.
Does this thing work?
Oh, there you go.
Slide toward?
Not from there, probably.
No worries.
Just use the mouse and click on that and it'll advance.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody in the room and online. My name is Peyton Lisenby. I'm the kind of project manager for our effort so far in assessing reallocation at Lake Whitney. I actually came to this group a couple of years ago, I think, to give an update on the project. And now we're in the final stages of it. So I have the opportunity to tell you kind of where we landed and what the next steps are going forward. Just as a refresher, we are dealing with Lake Whitney here, that guy right there. And you can see that's a red dot. So all the red dots on the map, these are reservoirs that are part of the BRA's water supply system. The yellow dots on the map are Corps of Engineers reservoirs. The red dots are BRA reservoirs. So Lake Whitney is a Corps of Engineers reservoir. It is the primary flood control reservoir on the Brazos River. You can see it's the only one on the main stem. So Lake Whitney has, and we'll see in a second, as a primary purpose as flood control, is a very large flood control pool. Both BRA reservoirs, Possum Keenan and Granbury, are located upstream. Fun fact: Lake Whitney could, if we drained PK and Granbury, Lake Whitney could hold it all. It's a great big flood pool, right? And so, as part of our system, BRA, we are kind of constantly assessing ways to optimize the supply that we can make available from this reservoir supply system. Reallocation is one of those options that is very attractive because it doesn't usually involve too much new construction. You can take something that's already there, assess how that resource is being used, and is there a better way to use it? Is there a better way to assign what pools, what portions of water in that resource are available for water supply compared with how they've been used in the past? And if you can, then you can, with the federal government, go through a process by which you reallocate, you change the portions of water in that resource that are designated for specific types of supply. So in doing so, you can avoid a lot of, obviously, construction costs, you can avoid a lot of environmental impacts, a lot of permitting time, and you can bring resources online at lower cost with lower impacts. So that's the attractiveness of reallocation at Lake Whitney. Oops, I'm pushing the button and I got to push the mouse. So, and this could really be said of any Corps of Engineer reservoir, right? They're primarily flood control reservoirs. So the flood pool is over 1 million acre feet at Lake Whitney. That's what I said before. It can hold a lot of water. The conservation pool at Whitney is also quite large, and it's actually more complicated than this, but I'll show you another slide and we'll bust out what's really going on here. But we've got over 600,000 acre feet of conservation storage below the current top of conservation pool at 533 feet. So it's a multi-purpose reservoir at a minimum with conservation storage and flood pool storage. Currently, a small portion of this conservation pool is allocated for water supply, and the Brazos River Authority holds the state authorization to make use of that water supply. But it's only a very small portion, less than 10% of this total space is reserved for water supply. The other big user of the conservation pool is hydropower. Most of this conservation pool is reserved for either hydropower generation, using the water to generate electricity, or what's called power head, which is you're using the water as a table to hold up the layer of water that you use for generation. So you get a high enough elevation to have enough potential energy to generate hydropower, okay? So by and large, aside from flood control, which is the primary purpose, water supply and hydropower are the other two, and hydropower is certainly the predominant volume that's stored in the conservation pool. And there's a little bit of an active pool down here, not very much, that we don't really need to worry about. So the reallocation study, it's a simple premise. You're kind of looking at a bunch of what ifs. You want to look at how many different ways could there be to provide additional water supply to meet demands in the Brazos Basin. We know demands are growing. They're growing every day. BRA is constantly assessing ways in which we can meet those demands, but we also have to be cognizant of how long does it take to bring that resources online? What does it cost? What are the impacts and things like that? So reallocation looks at, for a particular resource, in this case, Lake Whitney, how many ways in which can we assess it to see if additional water supply can be available. And however many ways there are, what is the volume of new available water associated with each one of them? So of all these alternatives, how much can each of them supply? And then obviously you're looking for the best. And by best, we mean, does it give you enough to actually meet the demands? Are you meeting your goal here from a water supply perspective while minimizing impacts, right? And not just environmental impacts, but also impacts on the other authorized purposes of the reservoir, right? The reservoir still has to fulfill its congressionally intended purpose of flood control primarily, but also hydropower. These are all water supply, hydropower, flood control. These were all purposes that Congress intended when they authorized Lake Whitney to be constructed, as it is a federal reservoir. And so this kind of storyboards the process of a feasibility study. The first part is, how many different ways are there to reallocate the reservoir? What are the volumes associated with those? And what are the impacts associated with those volumes? Okay, pretty straightforward three-step process. So, as I mentioned before, we have quite a lot of need, quite a lot of growth. And again, from the map, Lake Whitney is well positioned in the basin. It's fairly high upstream, which is good. It means you have more folks downstream that you can release water to. The higher up in a basin the water supply reservoir is, the more useful it has, the more potential it has to be useful. Additionally, it's in a good spot if for lakeside use, for downstream use. Geographically, it makes sense that if you could increase supply there, it could be the most useful. The other thing, the other factor, and this is kind of a wild card here, is that hydropower operations have changed in the past wee while. Historically, Lake Whitney's been in operation since the 50s, and pretty much since the 50s up to about 2015, it operated as what's called a peaking plant, where it supplied electricity during times of high power demand. So think summers, hot summers, high demand on the grid. Lake Whitney would generate every day to meet that demand, to supply electricity. In around 2015, energy markets in Texas have changed a good bit. And as you all may or may not know, Texas has a kind of an interesting energy market. We have a lot of different energy mechanisms, traditional, hydrocarbons, renewables, hydropower. And around 2015, the turbine operations at Lake Whitney changed so that it didn't operate as a peaking plant, supplying electricity to be consumed to meet demand. Rather, it switched to what's called an ancillary service, what I call ready reserve. So its intent changed from supplying electricity to supplying the capacity to generate electricity. What I mean by that is the storage at Lake Whitney was no longer passed through the turbines as much to generate electricity. It was held in the reservoir in case the grid needed it. And what that means from a water supply standpoint is it's a lot less water flowing downstream. Okay, and that put additional stress on our supply system. For decades, in the summers, water demands and electricity demands kind of aligned, right? In the summers, people need water, people also need electricity. And so a lot of water was flowing downstream, and that could actually be taken out of the stream to meet water demands. In 2015, that changed. The turbines were refurbished to facilitate this new type of operation, this ready reserve operation. And that meant a lot less water was going downstream. A lot more water was being held in the reservoir, but couldn't be used for supply needs, right? Hence the reallocation study, right? We had to petition the federal government to say, hey, we have this demand situation with water in Texas in the Brazos River Authority system. Can we look at the storage in Lake Whitney, considering these new hydropower operations, and see if we can't allocate this water in a way that makes more sense, that's more equitable among the uses? So we got authorization to do that. We actually got it, a piece of legislation that allowed the Corps of Engineers, who operates the reservoir, to perform the feasibility study. Feasibility studies with the Corps follow what's called a 3x3x3 approach. No more than $3 million spent over 3 years, and the final report of the study is reviewed at all 3 levels of the Corps. The district level, which in our case is Fort Worth District, the division level, which is Southwestern Division, they have an office in Dallas, and then headquarters, the folks at DC, right, the decision makers. Also, it requires a non-federal sponsor. That's us. We're the non-federal sponsor. We contribute half the study cost, so BRA's parts of $1.5 million, And we're the partner in this study. We aid in the development of the models to assess the alternatives, the development of the alternatives, the analysis. Obviously, they need a lot of our data to make the model work. And we help in also reviewing that data in report language as it goes along. So it's very much hand in hand, BRA, Corps of Engineers, and getting the study done. Timeline wise, and this is kind of this graphic is from the Corps that I've kind of chopped down to fit on the slide. But the idea here is you are scoping, you're figuring out the alternatives. How many ways can you assess? Can you allocate water in the resource? Once you figure those out and get that approved, then you start evaluating them. All right, how much water is associated with all these alternatives? Each way you could reconfigure the storage in the reservoir, how much volume is associated with that, and how feasible is that, right? For example, one of the alternatives, and we'll talk about this more, could be, oh, well, we'll just take more flood pool and turn it into conservation pool. Super, but now you've reduced the reservoir's capacity to be a flood control reservoir, right? So there's give and take with all of them. So that's when you're making those assessments all through here. We have some key checkpoints along the way where the district team checks in with the division and the headquarters team. And for our part, this all started in 2023. We signed the cost sharing agreement with the Corps. That's when the study began. That's when the clock started. Summer 2023, we got the alternatives. How many different ways we're going to look at this? We ended up with about six to eight. Some fell off as we went along. We got the upper echelons of the Corps' blessing on that in the fall of 23, and then we started working on the model. We spent a good long time working on the model and evaluating the alternatives with the model. And the model is a basin-wide representation of all the reservoirs in the Brazos Basin and how they operate. And if you change how storage works in one, you see how those changes kind of propagate throughout. And then in spring 25, we landed on what's called a TSP, the tentatively selected plan. And that's where the Corps says, look, we think this alternative has the most potential. We're going to come up with a draft report and present it to the public. And that's what happened in summer 25. So last year in August, draft report was issued, public notice, public meeting, presenting the tentatively selected plan and all the modeling results of all the alternatives. The Corps does their own very rigorous internal review process where they have other, it's kind of like a blind review where they go to other districts in the Corps, people who are not familiar with this, and have them read it so that, you know, fresh eyes, so they can catch anything that needs to be caught. Through the winter, we got the report updated, the draft kind of converted into a final draft. We got buy-in from the Army Corps headquarters, which is the command level validation milestone. And where we are now, here is in spring 26, spring 23, spring 26, 3 years, on time, on budget. So that worked out well. Currently, the final report is being reviewed at the division and headquarters level. We did the feasibility study all on time. Once you send things up to headquarters in Washington, D.C., turns out those folks are real busy, so sometimes the timelines can shift there, but that's where we are now. So as far as the feasibility report, we got that done on time, and the final decision maker here is going to be the Assistant Secretary of the Army. Key kind of note here, the way it works is the district makes a recommendation based on the report. The Fort Worth District says, we recommend this approach for the reallocation based on the results of our feasibility study. And then that goes through division into headquarters and results in what's called a director's memorandum, depending on the size and type and impacts of the reallocation. In our case, the director will write a memorandum to the Secretary of the Army, who can either agree or modify it or change it. They can really do whatever they want, but the Corps makes a recommendation to the Assistant Secretary to say, this is what we think we should do. Okay, so I mentioned that we'd see this slide again. Right, so this is, in general, how Corps of Engineers reservoir looks. In Lake Whitney's case, it has water supply and hydropower in the conservation pool. And it is the only reservoir in the Brazos that has hydropower use as part of the conservation pool. In reality, this is how it's actually busted up currently, right, without reallocation. I mentioned before that less than 10%, this is not to scale, less than 10% of the conservation pool is reserved or is allocated for water supply. That's it right there. So this is BRA's. We have a water right. So we have the allocation from the federal government and a water right authorization from the state to make use of this 57,000 acre feet of water for water supply needs. This 57,000 feet exists between elevation 520 and 533. This is what's sometimes called the active part of the conservation pool, or just the conservation pool, depends on who you ask. And so this active part, this 13-foot layer of water here, we currently have 22% of that. But this number here is less than 10% of the total conservation storage between here and here. Federal hydropower has the majority of this 13-foot layer on top. This is the water that they use to generate. And then the bulk of the conservation pool here is just Powerhead Reserve. It's a table. And so what we are assessing is, can we adjust these borders here to make the water supply allocation larger without having any significant impact on hydropower or flood control or other uses that like all lakes are for, recreation, tourism, things like that. But so in effect, all the alternatives I mentioned, all 6, 7, 8 alternatives, all had some degree of, what if we made the conservation pool higher? Or what if we shifted this internal boundary over and gave more to water supply? Or what if we dipped into the Powerhead Reserve? How much volume can we generate by doing all these different options individually or in combination? And how much impact does that alternative have on the other uses? And what we landed on, what was the TSP and what now has become the district's recommended plan, is this. Leave the top of conservation pool alone. We're not going into the flood pool. As we were doing the reallocation study, this is just a fun fact, as we were doing the reallocation study, the Corps is also constantly assessing its reservoirs for risk, right? Lake Whitney is now considered a Dam Safety Action Classification, DSAC, I think is what that stands for, DSAC 3, which is a slightly higher risk factor, right? Similar to Waco Lake here. Not because the dam is in any kind of poor condition, but rather there's been so much growth and development downstream that there's more risk associated with anything happening with the dam. Similar to Lake Waco. You've had a lot of development downstream on the Brazos. What that means is it really isn't in our interest to try and go into the flood pool to impair or in any way impact the dam's flood control capacity. We want to preserve that, okay, because that's the most important function of the dam. What we can do, however, is assess the allocation split between water supply and hydropower. And so what's been proposed as the district's recommended plan is that we increase in this 520 to 533 layer, the current active portion of the conservation pool, we increase the water supply allocation from this 57,292 to about 130,000. That's a 50-50 split in this top layer with hydropower. In addition to that, we can drop the bottom boundary here of the conservation or the active portion of the conservation pool down to 512. And that essentially makes more water available or active for water supply needs. And so water supply would take all of that. So the total water supply allocation would increase from the 57,292 to the new number of 241,646. And there's a couple interesting components to this. The first is that the hydropower allocation is actually still higher than what Congress originally intended when the reservoir was built. Because, a couple other fun facts about Whitney, when it was built in the 50s, the top of conservation pool, the level that the lake was maintained at, used to be 520. It used to be a lot lower. And then as other reservoirs in the Brazos Basin were built, like Lake Belton, Lake Stillhouse Hollow, those kind of took some of the burden off of Whitney for flood control needs. It wasn't all on Whitney as other flood control lakes came on. And so it was like, well, we don't need to maintain Whitney so low to create so much accommodations place for floodwater. So through the mid 70s or early 70s, the top of conservation pool was increased to where it is today at 533. But originally, the intended or designed amount of water for hydropower use was around 130,000 acre feet. So we've preserved that with the reallocation. And then we've been able to increase our water supply down here by lowering the bottom of the conservation pool down a little bit because, like I said, the top of the conservation pool used to be 520 and water was routinely generated all the way down to elevation 510. So just because this is how the reservoir looks today, when it was originally authorized and then built, it looked quite different and the lake was quite much lower. We've been able to take this water supply allocation and preserve and really even maintain the higher levels when you compare it to how the lake was originally built. And so there's a lot of arrows, there's a lot of numbers on this graph or on this chart. This is what it looks like more simply, okay? The active portion of the conservation pool now will be between 512 and 533. Federal hydropower gets their same 130,000 acre feet and water supply gets 241,000 acre feet. And Powerhead Reserve down here and that small and active pool together is about 245,000 acre feet. So water supply allocation increases from the 57 to the 241. That's an increase of about 184,000 acre feet of total volume, okay? Interestingly enough, we had a lot of concern, a lot of questions, and a lot of analysis related to what does this mean for lake levels? Okay, a lot of folks, me included, I'm a big fisherman. I go to Lake Whitney all the time. I'm very concerned about lake levels too, mainly because it involves how many things I can run into in my boat. But it's interesting in that you have to take into consideration the history of how the reservoir has been used. So like I mentioned before, from the 50s through about 2015, the reservoir was constantly generating electricity. So the lake levels actually varied quite a bit, right? You generate with electricity, you drop the lake level as you release that water downstream. Since 2015, there hasn't been very much generation. So the lake levels kind of remained static, okay? With this recommended plan, more water would be used for the reservoir, but it still doesn't equate to how much used to be used back when hydropower was generating for electricity. And so this is the comparison down here, and I have another graph to hopefully make this more clear. But if you take the current conditions in the model that the Corps used to evaluate the alternatives, the post-2015 conditions, the average lake level will be less than a foot lower than what it is now on average over the period of record. Compared to how the lake has historically actually been operated, the observed lake levels pre-2015, the lake's actually going to be over 2 feet higher than what has been done historically. The reason for that is because you're comparing how much water they used to generate electricity with that they're not doing anymore versus how much water would be used for water supply. And graphically, it looks like this. So this was produced by one of the Corps of Engineers' modeler, and all the different colored lines here are all the different alternatives. We ended up with 6 final alternatives. It's kind of hard to see, they're all smashed together because a lot of their results are very similar. The current conditions is Alt 1. Alt 1 is just how the lake is today. That's that green line right there. So these are the average lake elevations across the 12 months of the year, right? And you can see we're all hovering around, between 530 and 534, something like that. So the current conditions is that green line, right? That's the average elevations through the year over the period of record. The observed lake levels, what was happening when the lake was actually generating electricity, you can see is much lower, right? So prior to 2015, and that's a real long time ago, so maybe nobody remembers, but the lake on average was a lot lower than it is today because they were generating a lot more electricity back then. Our recommended plan, or the district's recommended plan, is that dotted line right here. So you can see on average, we're much higher than what the lake historically has been, and just a hair under what the current conditions are. So regarding impacts, and this is from the final report that's currently being evaluated at the headquarters level. The district's recommended plan, the proposal for the reallocation, doesn't have any impact on any federally listed species or critical habitat. There are some archaeological surveys that need to be accomplished. If your lake's level is going to be a little bit different than it has in the past, it may expose or inundate culturally significant areas that weren't exposed or inundated as much in the past. So the BRA, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the Corps of Engineers have all entered into what they call a programmatic agreement. Essentially, it's a contract so that BRA completes all of the archaeological surveys necessary to evaluate that area around the lake where the lake level may fluctuate differently over the next 20 years. Obviously, you can't plan it out exactly because we're not in charge of how much it rains. So whenever those areas are exposed, we have a plan to actually go out there and do archaeological surveys to see if there's anything that needs to be preserved, removed, protected, anything like that. We don't have any impacts to the quality of the human environment, which is one of the key metrics that the Corps checks for. And the most important one down here at the bottom is that the proposed reallocation plan doesn't seriously affect any of the other authorized purposes. That's flood control, hydropower, recreation, tourism, and it doesn't involve any major structural or operational changes. And that's from a dollar sign perspective, that's a big deal there. We can increase our water supply over 100,000 acre feet of volume. We don't have to build anything. 100,000 acre feet of storage is a whole lake, right? Building a lake today is north of $1 billion, and we don't have to do it. It's already there. And that's what's most attractive about reallocation as a water supply strategy. So from a procedural standpoint, this is important for the Corps of Engineers. If you don't have any impacts to your other authorized purposes and you don't have any major structural changes, the reallocation is within the authority of the Secretary of the Army. That's why the Secretary of the Army is the final decision maker. You don't have to go back to Congress to get a law passed to say you can use the reservoir this way. You're not changing how the reservoir's been used, so the Secretary of the Army can make the final decision, which is good. It does make the process go a lot faster than having to get a law passed. So next steps for us. Like I said, currently, final report is between division and headquarters, right? They're reviewing it. Headquarters will generate a director's memorandum, and that'll go to the ASA, the Assistant Secretary of the Army, for final approval. The Assistant Secretary of the Army can kind of take as long as they want to make the final approval. We're not exactly sure when they'll get it done, but hopefully soon-ish. But that's not a set schedule. They make their own schedule. After that, whenever that happens, afterward, it'll be then on the Brazos River Authority and the Corps of Engineers Fort Worth District to develop a new water supply storage contract for that new chunk of water. And then once we've demonstrated that we have permission from the federal government to store the water, we will then have to go to the state. We'll need to go to TCEQ, show them that we have the means to store this new amount of water in Whitney and apply for a new water right to authorize. The state obviously has to authorize the BRA to use that water that's available. So that's where we landed. Again, we did it in 3 years. It's been an interesting study, but we're really happy with the result and the lack of impact, really, in being able to make that much water available. So we're all, fingers crossed, we're all waiting for the headquarters level review and ASA to complete their process so we can get working on the storage contract. So that's all I have. Are there any questions? Yes.
To be in the past, they would generate if that water was like this.
Right.
Is it going to be like more steady, or is it going to be piped directly from the lake so it wouldn't impact below the dam? I'm just wondering.
In general, more water will be released from the reservoir downstream under this reallocation plan than what has been the case since 2015, where they haven't been generating very much. You're right in that some of the use can be local, right? So some of the folks, you can take it directly from the lake and use it local, but where we're seeing the demands, most of that's downstream, right? So one of the environmental benefits actually of reallocation is that we restore to some extent more of the flows that used to occur downstream during those summer months would occur under this reallocation. And that's what we've been missing for the past 11 years. And I would add, you can even see that in the statistical data for the stream gauges downstream. The gauges had so many years in the period of record where they were recording these flows downstream in the summer that statistically, the gauges thought, oh, it's normal for this amount of water to be flowing downstream. And then since 2015, water hadn't been there. And so they've reported data that's much below normal, right, for flows below the Whitney Dam since 2015 because hydropower generation has stopped. So again, one of the benefits of the reallocation is that more water ultimately will make it downstream. Yep, it's a good question. Any others? All right. Well, hopefully, if I do talk to you guys again, it will be, hey, we've got a water right and we got all this water available for sale. So I'm very excited about it. And I appreciate the opportunity to brief you guys on it again. So thanks.
All righty, thanks again. All right, we're going to move on with our looking at our watersheds and what is impaired and is not. All right, and we are on the Bosque River watershed right here. Okay, the Bosque River watershed. TCQ monitors there, as well as BRA and a few tier stations. There are 30 routine monitoring stations in this watershed, 9 segments with bacteria impairments, and they are primarily up here in this northern area. Some of these little tributaries up here, and then one down here on Wasp Creek. There are also a couple of dissolved oxygen impairments and concerns here. 1 bacterial concern, 15 chlorophyll and nutrient concerns, 5 DO concerns, and 1 macrobenthic community concern. Project here, there's the North Bosque River Phosphorus TMDL is an implementation. And that addresses segments 226 and 225. Since those are under a TMDL, if they didn't have a TMDL, they would be impaired for excessive algal growth, but they are not on the list since TMDL is helping to take care of that impairment. Do we have any questions or projects going on in the Bosque River watershed that anyone knows about or wants to discuss? All right, no questions about the Bosque then. We will move on to the Leon River watershed, which is right next to it. There's the Leon River watershed. Okay, so there was one change in the draft 2026 integrated report. One stream, Duncan Creek, was delisted for bacteria, so it now meets its standard. In this watershed, BRA does a lot of monitoring as well as TCQ, with 41 routine monitoring stations in this watershed. There are also 14 segments with bacterial impairments in this watershed, and 2 dissolved oxygen impairments. Again, some concerns for chlorophyll A and nutrients in 12 segments, 4 of them with bacterial concerns, 5 with dissolved oxygen concerns, and 1 with a habitat concern. Several projects going on in this watershed. The Leon River Watershed Protection Plan has been going on for quite a while. We also have the Nolan Creek, South Nolan Creek Watershed Protection Plan, and there was a Proctor Lake Watershed Characterization. Sometimes those water characterizations turn into watershed protection plans, but I'm not sure about that one yet. Anything that anyone wants to discuss about the Leon River watershed at this point? Any questions? Yes.
Hey, I'm just curious because I love Vista Temple and we get our water from Lake Belton.
Mm-hmm.
The Leon River Protection Plan, I just clicked on that link. It's been in place since 1998. Is there any idea for why this has basically been going on for so long?
Oh, the Leon River Watershed Protection Plan?
Yeah.
Who runs that? Is it TWRI? Or TWRI people here? Yes, there's your neighbor.
So can you repeat your question?
Oh, could you turn your microphone on if you don't mind?
Yeah,
Thank
my
you.
question was, at least according to this, the Leon River Watershed Protection Plan has been in place since 1998. So I guess basically that's a long time.
Sure.
Yeah. Is there a reason why it hasn't been improved, I guess, over that time?
So we're currently working on implementation of that watershed protection plan. And so getting stakeholders involved in actions to remediate those water quality impairments to improve it. Beyond that, I couldn't really talk to why it hasn't come off the list.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and watershed protection plans, just because when those are in place, it doesn't necessarily, like a TMDL, when those are in place, they do knock them off of the list. And they're more regulatory, whereas the watershed protection plans are, voluntary measures. So that doesn't, they're doing something to help the issue and implement the plan, but it doesn't necessarily take the stream or whatever off the list, unless those best management practices they put in place reduces that, whatever it is that caused it to be impaired. So,
Well, and the bulk of those on a WPP are also non-point source. So you've got wildlife influences. Feral hogs are a big player in the Leon, especially when it comes to bacteria. Rural septic tanks, depending on proximity to river. So there's a lot of widely distributed small sources there that it's really hard to control, whereas a TMDL is you're controlling dischargers, so you get a much quicker and usually more finite resolution with those than you do when you're working with WPP and trying to get individual landowner compliance and change of habits. It takes a lot longer, and I think some of it is, I think some areas based on geology, temperatures, things like that are always going to struggle with the way we do bacteria standards. In more rural areas, to be specific.
yeah, and it's a good thing the watershed protection plan is still going on. So that means people are still participating in it and taking action, because a lot of times, your participation completely falls off and the watershed protection plan dies sometimes. So it's good that this one is still out there and active.
Jenna,
Yes.
Annalee Epps in the comments section in the chat
Mhm.
says that the Leon River was placed on the integrated report in 1998, but the watershed protection plan didn't start until 2015.
Okay.
And she provided a link to that in the chat.
Thank you, Annalee. Any other questions or comments in the Leon? Okay, well, we can move on to our next talk then about Nolan Creek watershed outreach efforts and a few other things about the Nolan Creek with Valencia Ramirez with the city of Nolanville. And it might take me just a minute to pull up her link. Okay. I won't edit your file. There we go.
Good morning. My name is Valencia Ramirez, and I am the Nolan Creek Watershed Coordinator, and I am based out of the city of Nolanville. So I'm here today to talk about some of our outreach efforts that we have done within Nolan Creek Watershed. I feel that outreach is very important for all of us and all of our different missions. And so these are the 4 topics that I have found have really helped us with getting our mission kind of out there and teaming up together to really just educate the public at all age levels. So one big thing has been our partnerships, and then next is education, our social media, and then providing action steps. So these are some of our partnerships that we've created within the Nolan Creek watershed. Of course, it is our entities that are involved in our WPP within Nolan Creek watershed, and all the city's local events, including Fort Hood events as well. Our master naturalists have been a key component, and so has our Texas Stream team. And then, of course, there's some others on there. One of our other big groups is our Youth Volunteer Corps. They've come out, they're a group of kiddos, and they've honestly gotten to the point where I've educated them on some of the water projects going on, and they're able to go and showcase it to other students as well. Next has been our education. So with these partnerships, they've either joined us with co-hosting these events, or they've been the one hosting the event, and or they've directed me like, hey, I think this would be a great opportunity for you to talk about the watershed and things that we need to work on. So those partnerships have helped, but they've helped us go out and educate the public at about, in the past year, about 18 school events I've done. And then public events, we've done about 70. I've been about 50 of these, about 90 events. So I do a lot of outreach. Within the schools, we've done field trips, career days, science nights, and water testing lessons. So that one was a fun one to go into the school, give them a small scale of what we do to water tests and why our bodies of water are impaired, and what are things that we're doing locally, but also like what the BRA is doing and everybody else too. From that, we actually were able to go provide a lesson of how to water test. And then we came in, they were given a project of how to take care of their waterways. What is one project that they can do to fix a problem within a waterway? And so they took what I taught them, and they were so excited. They were middle schoolers. They created this project, and I got to go in and actually judge their science fair projects. So they were super excited. One of the projects we actually displayed at our Smart Museum in Nolanville. So it was on display for the public. They even got an award at our city council meeting. So getting not only the kids involved, but then the parents were excited as well. And then also with the school events, we did have a huge project I'm going to talk about later, where the water pipelines were being replaced. And so we needed to go on some water conservation. And at these events, I was also able to talk about that big project coming up and expressing the need to conserve our water for this project coming up. So it was a great outlet at these events too. I typically do a small scale project that can be a 15-minute project or even done in 2 minutes. The kiddos and the project that is displayed on here with the kids, it was our science night. That was a magic science night. So to them, seeing the water change colors for the pH testing was like a magical spell, and that's how we spinned it off. But they got to learn about it while the parents got to read the info signs that I had displayed with further details. So I've had some parents that came out and they're like, oh, like we're really interested in this. So I get to talk to them more. The kids are interested. They want to learn about more stuff. So definitely getting into the schools has been a huge deal of making people even aware that we have a Nolan Creek watershed, because frankly, a lot of people were not aware. So, but yes, and then the public events, we're going out. We have certification courses that we've been hosting. There is monthly water testing that's going on along Nolan Creek at multiple locations in Nolanville and in Belton. So that's been fun. And then we have our outdoor expo centers. So I definitely suggest, getting to know your partners within your area, and it makes it easier to pass out your messages. So with our social media, this is one of our bigger campaigns that we've done in this past year. We were in collaboration with the Syntec Sustainability Partnership. And so part of that partnership that was impacted by this project was Fort Hood, City of Killeen, Harker Heights, Nolanville, Belton, and Coppers Cove. That's a lot of cities to get together to create one message across the board and go with one effort. But we had collaborative meetings consistently, and then we were able to get the contingency plans, coordinated our media release schedules, and talk to our media and get it all out. Everything was a unified message, which we found to be very impactful. So when the day came that we had to go through this conservation effort, all the public honestly was aware, to the point, even on my Ring camera, if the neighborhood notifications, some people were even posting about it, like the general public. So to see that our message was getting out there at a level where the general public was even letting other community members know, I thought was very successful. But yes, so we did not just post a flyer. The flyer was consistent. You just changed out your city's picture and put it there. It wasn't just a flyer we did, though. We also did a video for the water cadence and a do's and don'ts video. So they're just silly, funny little videos, but that got the message across. And that was a different form of getting our efforts out there, which made it fun and, was more eye-catching than a flyer, truly. And then the other thing we did was we had daily updates of our huge project going on. So the project was entirely transparent from start to finish. Yes. So because of our efforts that we've gone through social media, the pressure levels, they remained regulatory the entire time. And there was no emergency water distribution that was needed to be activated, no boil water notices issued, no water outages. Hospitals and fire departments were able to operate as normal. And we received the Sustainability Practice Award from AFWA for all of our efforts done. As the date said on the other one, that was the beginning of May or the end of May, right when summer kicked off. So those kids they got out of school and then it was, hey, we're on water conservation. Most kids, after you get out of school, you're going to summer, you want to go to the water parks. You want to go play, run your pools, fill up your pools and all that. So getting into the schools and telling the parents and telling the kids like, hey, remember, don't do this during this week, was a really big effort that came across. So we are very, happy that we were able to have this message come together. So my big thing for the other watersheds too is, getting to know your local partners so you can, if you have a big project like this, being able to share the same message across the board. Other social media efforts we've done is I have a short video out on Facebook that is me welcoming people to our new recreational site in Nolanville along the creek. And a lot of people were wanting to know where it was and what was going on there. Is the water safe? That was our biggest question when we opened up this park. So I posted a video that was simply saying, hey, here's our new location. We do monthly water testing on Tuesdays at 9 a.m., the second Tuesday of every month. Come out and join us. I'll be there. You can ask me any questions. And let me tell you how many people came and still come to our monthly water testing just to ask me questions. And I'm also known as the girl on the Facebook water video in our area. So it has been a video of impact of just simply letting people know where I'm going to be for questions. And then our website, I do have education that I filter out regularly. There's also a calendar with all the events happening within the watershed. If I know about it, I'll put it on the calendar. And so that's events happening again through Fort Hood, Harker Heights, Killeen, Nolanville, and Belton. The regional support on social media has been another big thing, creating those relationships with the social media people, not only in our partnerships, but also within the cities. So if there is something that is impacting our waterways or our water usage, or even in other situations, we've kind of all came together and we have these meetings to talk to each other about what things we want shared and why it's important. So we've really cultivated that relationship over the past year or two. So. And again, action opportunities. So I can go out and educate the public all day about why we should take care of our watershed, what impairments are going on, why this is important. But if they don't have something to do or implement what they've learned, that's when you kind of get the fall off from the public. And so, you know, we've been providing monthly water quality testing that they're able to come out in these locations. I provide it to them. We do it with the Texas Stream team, but they do not have to be partners in the Texas Stream team to do it. And so that is something that happens monthly. And then our certifications and workshops, yes, they can come, they can get it, they can get further education. But at the end of these workshops, I'm also providing them resources of how they can find further information and trying to make these workshops where it is something that they can go and take home with them and implement at their own house or within their own neighborhood. So it's not just, hey, here's a bunch of knowledge. It's how can we implement this knowledge on a normal basis for you? And then, of course, our waterway cleanups, we have them in the cities that are along the Nolan Creek watershed. They happen at least 2 times a year at bare minimum, if not more. And so that kind of brings me over to our big next action opportunity that we have, which is a regional waterway cleanup. So after seeing how our social media efforts for our big pipeline replacement project went, I came up to the Syntex Sustainability Group and I asked them if we could do a region-wide cleanup. And so they said yes. And we got all the city managers along with the garrison commander at Fort Hood to agree to this mission of coming together on a single day of impact to clean up the watershed. And we also realized that we have a lot of the same volunteers because we are so close-knit. So we wanted to provide these volunteers a single day to do it, but time to travel to a different location and go and help the community. So on May 16th, we are going to do our watershed cleanups, and it is going to impact the Nolan Creek watershed, Leon watershed, Lampasas River watershed, and the Slato watershed. So each of these cities, they provided a location, if not 2, of where they would like to go and clean up along their waterways. And so we'll go out and do that. And when I kind of did the math, it's about the watersheds that we're cleaning up do make up about 0.25% of the Brazos. And so it is a small portion, but we're trying to teach them like it is a big impact that they can make on this single day. And I'm excited. We're going to have each city will have a different giveaway to provide. And, you know, taking those pictures. And so we've advertised it again at our outreach events and stuff at our local group organizations. But yeah, and so I wanted to also invite y'all, if you are able to or would like to come out and, you know, be a part of this day of cleanup. I'm super excited that we can have, you know, this opportunity to have these cities all come together. To me, that is, it is amazing to see that. But yeah, so and then so some general Nolan Creek updates. The Nolan Creek watershed annual meeting is typically in August. We haven't determined the date yet, but once that is out, we will publicize it. And then as of 2025, all the sites listed on the Nolan Creek WPP are now being tested. We found out that they were not. And so I kind of went up and was like, nudge, nudge. Hey, just a reminder, these are our sites. Let's make sure. And, you know, once they realized they weren't testing it, they got on it and now it's being tested regularly. So also at least one staff in the Killeen, Harker Heights, and Nolanville cities have been certified through the Texas Stream team for the standard core water quality testing. So if something were to happen and they can't get it to an official lab or something, at least we can do some standardized testing for sure and keep track of that. And then our City of Nolanville, we have our TCQ 319 grant project. We are expected to start construction for the BMP, which is going to be a bioswale, in June, and hopefully be done with our project by December. That is our goal as of right now. Yeah, and then I have this final slide from the snow day. I couldn't decide which one to end on, so I also do have a second picture too, if it wants to pop up. There it is. I just thought it was really pretty and I'd like to share. So, but are there any questions? Standard core and the advanced standard. Not the bacterial. They are interested in starting it. It's just since it is community scientists, somebody would have to get an incubator and decide to designate an area to do that. But they are interested in doing it and they want to. So, yes.
Hi, could you tell me more about, and I know nothing, assume I know nothing, the TCEQ, the 319 project? Can you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, so it's along 10th Street in Nolanville. The drainage way there, they are going to reconstruct it and put in a bioswale to help filter out the pollutants and things coming off the roadways before it hits the creek itself. So we're trying to study what is the impact of putting in a bioswale. So I'm testing the waters at different locations, and now that Stream Team has a testing location in Nolanville, I'm able to kind of compare the data that we're collecting and see, what is the effectiveness of putting in a bioswale? Does it have a large impact or a smaller one? Is what we're trying to study. Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to, tell me if I'm remembering correctly, but 319 grants are to address non-point source pollution?
Correct.
Okay. Non-point source pollution, which generally means runoff.
Yes. Any other questions? All right.
That was a very informative, good presentation. Thank you. I do have on the list to go over the Land Passes River watershed, but I think I can bump that to after lunch. If everyone's ready to, is everyone ready to have lunch? Kind of hungry? Okay. Those online, we are going to break for lunch and come back at 12:40. No, 12:40. That's kind of a long time. No, I think that's okay. Or was that? No. No. I meant 12:20. It's 45 minutes too long, y'all think? Let's do 12:20. Sound good? I'll round y'all up and let y'all know when it's 12:20. So online people, we will reconvene at 12:20. Thank y'all.